Stepmom forces dad to throw me out on 18th birthday to make room for her baby. I refuse to go back after learning they stole money from my deceased mom's wealthy family. Hey, so I've been going through a rough patch with my family. I recently turned 18 last week, and my dad, who is 44, unfortunately thought it was the right time to kick me out. My own mother passed away when I was 3 years old in an unfortunate accident. Since then, my dad has had a long list of girlfriends and failed relationships. Even as a kid, I'd rarely see him without a woman in the house. I had a nanny to look after me during the day when my dad was at work, and whenever he came back, his girlfriend at the time would always be with him. He cut ties with my mother's family after her passing because he didn't see the point of keeping in touch with them. I assumed they didn't want a reminder of the tragedy either, so they didn't claim my custody or try to visit me. Growing up, it was just me and my dad, but he never seemed interested in being a father. He mostly spent his time either working or with his girlfriend, whoever it happened to be at the time. I tried really hard to get along with him as a kid, but I never received any love or affection from him. He did the bare minimum for me, so I gradually learned to expect nothing at all. That was my childhood, lonely and kind of sad. Thankfully, I still had my grandfather to keep me company, occasionally. He'd visit me often and was pretty much the only family I had. Unfortunately, he couldn't take me in because my father refused to give up custody for some reason. My dad was cold but not outright cruel, at least when I was a kid. I think that's why my grandfather didn't have enough legal reasons to try to take me away. Sometimes he'd visit me, other times I'd go to him. However, my father carefully controlled the length of my visits to ensure I didn't stay for more than 3 or 4 days. I still don't understand why my dad was so strict about this, but for whatever reason, he wasn't willing to give up custody. Even though he treated me coldly, he still wanted me around, and it doesn't make sense to me. As I got older, I began to rebel. I wanted to spend more time at my grandfather's place because he showed me more love and affection and actually seemed to care about me beyond just the basics. But my dad wouldn't allow it. Even when I told him how much better my grandfather treated me, he dismissed it, saying, asterisk, at the end of the day, I'm your dad and whatever I say goes. Asterisk. My grandfather tried several times to get my dad to treat me better, but nothing ever changed. Neither did my father let me move in with my grandfather. The situation became worse when my dad met his current wife, Veronica, 28F. Veronica used to be our neighbor's niece. She lived with them temporarily until her company provided proper accommodation. She and my dad started dating and got married a year later after 8 months of dating. Once Veronica came into the picture, both she and my dad became pretty vicious toward me. Veronica seemed to hate me from day one, and I had no idea why. I tried to be nice to her, but she just despised me. My guess is that she hated the fact I was a reminder of my dad's previous marriage, but that's just a theory. She made my life miserable. She treated me like a housekeeper and made me do all the chores, even though we had a maid. My dad never intervened. Living with Veronica felt like being Cinderella in my own house. She not only made me do all the chores, but also convinced my dad to stop giving me money for outings with my friends. This had never been an issue before. She insisted I was old enough to get a part-time job and start earning my own money, so my dad stopped supporting me financially. I had to get a job just to afford basic things like going out with friends, buying clothes, or replacing shoes I had outgrown. It was humiliating, but begging my dad to treat me like a human being was even worse. I told my grandfather about how Veronica was treating me, but nothing ever changed. He said he would talk to my dad, but it didn't help. Over time, I stopped hoping for change and accepted that I had to deal with their behavior until I could afford to move out for college. My 18th birthday was supposed to be a day of celebration. I had been planning to go out with friends, buy a couple of beers, and have a fun night. I had saved up money to splurge a little, but the morning of my birthday brought terrible news. My dad and Veronica sat me down and said they had something important to discuss. At first, I thought they might surprise me with something good. For a brief moment, I considered they might offer to help with college expenses. Instead, they told me I needed to leave the house. They explained that Veronica was pregnant and wanted to use my room as a nursery. My dad claimed they had thought about this decision for a long time and asked me not to beg or act pathetic. Veronica chimed in, pretending to be concerned, saying, asterisk, this could be the start of something great for you. Asterisk her fake optimism felt like a slap in the face. Panicking, I tried to reason with them. I mentioned that legally they couldn't evict me without notice and needed to give me a couple of months to find a place. I was bluffing, but my dad called me out, saying he had already consulted a lawyer and knew there would be no repercussions. I even offered to pay rent to stay, but Veronica shut that idea down, saying the issue wasn't money, but her need for peace during her pregnancy. My last desperate attempt was to ask if I could move to the basement. My dad refused that as well. It became clear they wanted me gone, at any cost. They had waited until I turned 18, so they could legally kick me out without facing any consequences. With no other option, I packed my things and headed to my grandfather's house. I knew he wasn't financially stable, but I had nowhere else to go. My grandfather had been a high school science teacher, but was now retired. He had struggled with a gambling addiction in the past, which depleted his savings. Despite his modest lifestyle, my grandfather welcomed me with open arms. When I told him what had happened, he was furious. He told me he had seen enough and was going to fix this once and for all. I didn't understand what my grandfather meant, but he made a phone call in another room. I tried to eavesdrop, but couldn't make out anything. When he came back an hour later, he assured me I had nothing to worry about. He said I could live with him and didn't need to stress about college expenses. He wouldn't tell me what was going on, but insisted I enjoy my birthday with my friends. Relieved, I decided to go out and make the most of the day. When I returned home late that night, I found multiple missed calls and texts from my dad. He begged me to come back, saying he had made a mistake. The next morning, I replied, telling him I wasn't coming back. I explained that I couldn't live with someone who treated me poorly, especially when Veronica was part of the picture. My dad sent a long, emotional text claiming he had found an old photo album of me and realized he was letting my mother down. He promised to be a better father and begged me to give him another chance. Feeling conflicted, I spoke to my grandfather about the situation. He finally revealed the truth. Ever since my mother's passing, my dad hadn't paid for anything related to me. My upbringing had been entirely funded by my mother's wealthy family. My grandfather had acted as a middleman, passing the money to my dad under the pretense that it came from him, knowing my dad wouldn't accept it otherwise. My mother's family had been generous, even paying for my private school education, but my dad started keeping the money for himself after marrying Veronica. When my grandfather told my mother's family about how I had been treated, they were outraged. They decided I should live with my grandfather instead and stop sending money to my dad. My dad only found out about this after I had already been kicked out, which explained his sudden change of heart. He wasn't begging me to come back out of love or regret. He wanted the money. My grandfather had kept this arrangement a secret for years, fearing my dad would refuse the funds if he knew their true source. Now that the truth was out, my dad realized his lifestyle would be impacted, and he desperately wanted me back to keep the funds flowing. After learning the truth, I blocked my dad's number. Not long after, Veronica started calling me instead. I didn't recognize her number and answered by accident. She pretended to cry and claimed my dad was heartbroken, saying, asterisk, I can't watch him suffer like this, especially in my condition. Asterisk. I cut her off, told her I wasn't interested, and asked her to hand the phone to my dad. When he got on the line, I told him I knew everything about the money from my mother's family. His silence confirmed my suspicions. I ended the call, blocked Veronica's number, and felt a sense of relief. Despite everything, I wanted to meet my mother's family. My grandfather had always respected their wishes to keep their distance, but I convinced him to reach out to them. It wasn't easy, but he managed to arrange a meeting. When the day arrived, I was nervous but excited. My grandfather came with me for support. Meeting my mother's parents and older brother was emotional. They cried when they saw me, saying I looked so much like her. Once we moved past the initial tears, we talked about our lives and interests. They were kind, warm, and genuinely interested in me. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. They assured me I wouldn't have to worry about college expenses, as they had already planned for my future. This lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. We promised to meet regularly, either by them visiting me or me flying out to see them. The truth about my dad and Veronica's behavior hurt, but it also set me free. I now have a loving support system in my grandfather and my mother's family. I'm finally able to focus on building a better future for myself without the toxic influence of my father. For the first time in years, I feel hopeful and excited about what's to come.